Hello everyone, my name is Nuwan and we will be starting off the community call for API Manager in about a minute. We have a good list of people joining the call today. So let's give a couple of more seconds for any more people who might be joining and then start the call. Thanks for making it to today's call. Okay, let's get started. It's up time. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody for today's API Manager community call. It's actually the first community call for API Manager that we are having. So I would like to warmly welcome everyone who's taking part in today's call. We've done a few announcements on Slack and on other channels, and hopefully a lot of people would be able to make it. There are already quite a number of people on the call. And my name is Nuwan Dias. I'm the product manager for the WSO2 API Manager. And the organizer of today's session is Sampath Rajapaksha. He's the organizer and the host for the call. So he will be running through the presentation. I will be speaking mainly on the first few minutes of the call, and then we'll open up the call for an open discussion. So in today's initial call, the intention of the call is of course to welcome everybody to the community call, and also to give you a brief of what we have been working on, what releases are coming up in the near future of API Manager. And we hope to have this call every 2 weeks, and we hope to have lots of engagement from the community, suggestions and so on. We had a few suggestions for topics for this call as well. We will take some of them during this call and some in the next call. So we will start off with today's session. It will be between 10 to 15 minutes, the initial session, and then we hope to open up the discussion to everyone on the call, to basically to ask any questions that you guys might be having, and we'll make it an open discussion. So let's get started. So we are going to mainly talk about our next release that is coming up at the end of this month. So the version number for this release is version 3.1. As most of you might be aware, we did a major release last October called API Manager 3.0, which was a significant change from the API Manager 2 versions. And now we are almost ready to announce API Manager 3.1. Which is coming up with a host of bug fixes and stabilizations on version 3.0, as well as a few new features that we have done. So let's take a look at the features that we are introducing in this release. So the first feature that we are integrating is a Lambda integration through the WSO2 API Manager. So if you are someone who's familiar with AWS Lambda, you would know that in order to invoke a Lambda function as an HTTPS or HTTP endpoint, you either have to go through an AWS gateway, or you either have to use an SDK, could be Node.js or some other SDK, in order to invoke a Lambda as an HTTP endpoint. So what we are enabling through this feature is we enable invoking AWS Lambda functions as HTTP endpoints through the WSO2 API Manager. So what you get out of this is you are able to create HTTP APIs on the API Manager and point to AWS Lambdas as the backends. So if you're someone who's already familiar with the API management solution, you will know that we have something called a backend endpoint. So that is where the actual API resides, and on API Manager we create a proxy for the actual endpoint. So in the case of Lambda, what we do is we expect you to provide the details of the Lambda function in the UI, as you can see on your screens now. You will be prompted when you select the API type as Lambda for this particular API type. You will be prompted to provide the name of your Lambda function against the resources of your API. So you get the opportunity or the ability to create HTTP APIs for Lambda functions. And another cool thing about this is that you can have multiple Lambda functions mapped to different resources of the API. So if you have three resources in an API, three resources could be mapped or rather linked to three different Lambda functions. So this is one of the cool or great features that is coming up in version 3.1. And the next feature we are introducing is called API categories. So this is a feature on the developer portal which allows API providers to categorize APIs by whatever grouping they want to. So this could be by departments in an organization, this could be by various types of entities and so on. So if you are an organization that has APIs in the finance in the finance department, in the accounting department, in the HR department, you could categorize these APIs by those respective categories. And the API providers would be selecting the categories for their respective APIs from the API publisher. It would be an admin type of user who would be deciding on what the categories are. So on the admin portal, the administrator would be deciding or rather specifying what the API categories in an organization are, and API providers can select one or more categories for their APIs through these predefined categories. So it's a little bit different than tags. So if you're aware of the usage of tags, it's a little bit different than tags. Tags is a way of where the API providers can use their own strings as tags, and tags are used mainly for the ease of searching. Categories are a little bit different. Providers cannot use their own categories. The categories are predefined by an administrative user, and you can they will be separated out in the developer portal by their respective categories of the APIs. So this is another feature that's coming up in the next version. So that's about the second feature. The third feature we are introducing is a pretty cool feature that involves some machine learning and some artificial intelligence behind the scenes. So this is actually a mechanism of recommending APIs to API consumers. So this is similar to like the experience that you get on Amazon or other popular what do you call online retail stores. So if you are a consumer of a particular product, and if you search for or buy a particular product, the next time you visit uh, the retail store, online retail store, could be Amazon or anything else, you would see some recommendations for you based on your search history, based on your previous purchases, and so on. So similarly, what we are doing with this feature is we take a record or a history of what API developers had searched for and what type of APIs they had subscribed to for their applications. And we also consider what type of applications that they are building in the system. And based on all of these, we give you recommendations for API. So it becomes much more easier for you to for a developer to find APIs on a portal. So this is especially useful for people who are building like large API marketplaces or public API marketplaces, and even in some large organizations. So we are dealing day in and day out with organizations who are having thousands of APIs in their ecosystem spread across multiple departments, and we are getting feedback that the developers are having a hard time finding APIs on the portal. So this is one mechanism of making it easy for the developers to find APIs. So this is a service that's actually hosted on our cloud. So you can have your API manager or the developer portal running anywhere, but the service that provides this functionality is hosted on a cloud. So you would have to integrate if you want this feature enabled. You would have to turn on a particular switch on the API manager, which enables it to connect to the API that's running on cloud, and then give you recommendations. So it will basically start tracking the user's actions, the looking at the purchase history or the usage history and so on, and giving you recommendations through the cloud on the developer portal that could be running anywhere. So that's about the recommendation system. And so one of the other things, other features that we are including in this release is a security audit for your Swagger files. So you may already be aware that we use Swagger files to create API. So you could either import your Swagger file from somewhere else, or you could even start creating APIs using our UIs, which would then be creating a Swagger file underneath for you to go and view and edit. So we are partnering up with a company called 42 Crunch, which also is the owner of API security.io. So if you're not familiar with that, do open up your browser and go to API security.io, and you will see some pretty cool services that enable you to uh, check the level of security of your API based on the definitions that are in your Swagger file, based on how you have defined your security types, how you have defined your scopes, how you have defined your schemas, and so on. So what this essentially does is that you get an option in the publisher that uh, uh, where you have a button that lets you allow you to audit your API. So once you press on this button will talk to a set of APIs that are powering up API security.io and give you a score for your API, a security score. And it will also tell you what kind of security issues you have on your API, and how you can fix those issues. It will tell you best practices for fixing those issues, and so on. So this is again a pretty cool feature. As we all know, security is a very important aspect in APIs, and this makes it very easy for API developers to check the best practices in terms of security of the API definitions through this facility. So that's about that, and we have a few active developments going on. I'll go through these quickly since I want to open up the conversation to the rest of the community. So one thing we are doing is called the private jet mode for API Manager APIs actually. So this is basically a system where the API runtime, or as we all know, the API gateway ecosystem runs on a Kubernetes cluster. An API manager connects to this Kubernetes cluster to deploy APIs in the form of micro gateways. So when you today, if you download an API manager and press and if you define an API and publish, it gets deployed on a monolith gateway or a server gateway. So with this mode, what you get is that when you publish an API, it gets created in your Kubernetes cluster on a dedicated runtime for itself, on something we call the micro gateway. So if you may have heard about the WSO2 micro gateway as well. So this micro gateway is running in Kubernetes, and each API gets its own independent gateway runtime on Kubernetes. So that's about the private jet mode. We are adding OAuth2 security for backend endpoints. So we already support things like basic authentication, digest authentication for backend security, and mutual TLS, and we are adding OAuth2 on top of that. We are also globalizing the scopes. So if you are someone who's familiar with the product, you will know that scopes are primarily given per API. We are extending that, so we are working on extending that support to have the ability to have scopes defined globally and shared across APIs, and also for multiple scopes to be attached to API resources. So at the moment, you can attach one scope per resource in an API. We are working on enabling support to enable multiple scopes per resources, and also service discovery. So this is basically a facility where you can connect your API design runtime with a Kubernetes ecosystem or a Kubernetes cluster, and this will tell you what services are already available. So what you can do is you can uh, pick a particular service and create an API for that particular service. So that's basically what service discovery is all about. It's about uh, making aware of the services that are already deployed on Kubernetes, and making it possible for developers to create APIs or other managed APIs for these services. And that's about it for the ongoing development. And we do have a set of questions, and we had a set of suggestions on the form we shared on our Slack channel and so on. So I will open up the discussion. There are some folks who have basically taken on the responsibility of answering some of the topics that were requested for. And if you have any questions, please do ask on this forum as well. We can try to answer it. We'll try to discuss about it in this forum based on the time we have. And in case we run short of time, we'll take note of it and open the discussion in the next forum. So there was a question on ISTIO, I believe. Is someone able to take that up?
Yes, no, and so this is Pubudu from API Manager team. So I'll be discussing on ISTIO integration, what we have done. So in last year, we actually did a ISTIO integration and we released a ISTIO mixer plugin. So, but with the recent changes that Istio has taken, like there is a performance hit when we have a mixer plugin. So they are like going away from the mixer approach, and all these capabilities are now coming to the NOI or the ingress gateway or the uh, data proxies. So what we are going to do is, I think maybe Sampath, if you can let me share my screen, I think I can show how we are going ahead with and okay, so so this is how it is going to uh, how we are going to apply API management in for ISTIO integration. So this is will be available, we will make it available in the website, so you can come and check it out. So we have very recent release Kubernetes API operator. So what it does is it takes a Swagger file from as an input, and it will deploy a API gateway in Kubernetes. So when you give a simple Swagger definition, it will it will run API micro gateway in Kubernetes. So simply by doing that, you can do API management for your services that are running in Kubernetes. So we have taken that similar approach, and we are going to do the same thing for Istio integration as well. So you can, so as in the first diagram, you can see you can have the services running in Istio. So this is about the permissive mode. So then for those services, if you want to apply API management, you can get the Swagger definition and deploy using API operator. Simply that your services can be exposed via API micro gateway. So that's about the permissive mode in Istio. And when it comes to the TLS, like mutual TLS mode enable, so what we can do here is we expose those services via the API micro gateway, and then those requests will come to API micro gateway, then it will go to the Istio ingress gateway, and then to the backend services. So that's the second approach. And also there is a third approach, which is like you can deploy API micro gateway in Istio as a service in Istio. So then you can route all the traffic via Istio ingress gateway. So all the traffic will be coming to the Istio ingress gateway and to API gateway. Then you can apply API management there. Then from there you can route to different services. So that's uh, how this third approach will going to look like, and this is how we are going to move ahead and do API management uh, with Istio. So that's about uh, ISTIO integration. So let me, yeah. So maybe we can take the other questions. And also, I think other question is about how API management can be like auto scale with the load. So even we have done a webinar last year how like we have deployed API manager in Kubernetes. Then we did a demo like we did some load testing, and based on the load and based on the load we scaled the uh, API manager or the gateway. So that's in Kubernetes. Like we can create an auto scaling policy, and then we can define a policy like based on a threshold in based on the like CPU threshold. So if the it is going ahead of the threshold, then you can scale up to maybe 2 pods or 5 pods or any number of pods that is required. So the auto scaling part or the scaling can be done based on the load. So that's one of the approach, and I think this is mainly be used in container world rather than we do that in a VM. So I think that's one way to do the load balancing or the auto scaling and loading API manager based on the load you get in production. Okay, so
Yeah, so Pubdu, I think we can share the link to the webinar on our Slack channel
yes,
so
yes,
that
we can share.
I have a question. This is Tapan. Uh, it's related to the security part. You just mentioned security API security.io, wherein we
yeah.
need to mention the Swagger file. Uh, so can you be a bit more like elaborative how it works? I mean, the percentage you were showing that it is 75% or 65% secure, like that. I just
Yes.
opened that website in the browser.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So this is actually
yeah. So this is. Mhm. So if I can tell you like the security around it, so there is something called. I mean, I won't give you the details, but in general, like what we are doing, I can tell you. So we have a sort of you can say a 5 layer security layer over all the I mean the APIs we have. So
right,
therein we check the viruses and all those things, and then we are using sort of mutual auth also. Then
right,
we are using type 5 password. So these kind of
right,
securities we are using right now. Now, so how
right.
is this like percentage works? That I was a bit interested in. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the main thing about this is that this is a score based on your API definition. So this score
Mm-hmm.
has nothing to do with the runtime security aspect. So, but the things that you were talking about the various layers of security, about the well TLS and firewalls and so on, all of them
Mm-hmm.
are based on the runtime aspects.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is 100% based on your design of the API. So in your API definition, in yours, which is the Swagger file basically, you specify certain aspects of your API in terms of security, such as you mention the types of security. You mention when I say types, these are OAuth2, basic authentication, and so on. And then you specify the scopes for your API resources, and then you define your schemas, right? And you use schemas in various places in your API resources. So this is basically a tool that audits the definition of your API. For example, if you haven't explicitly given a schema for a particular resource, or if you haven't explicitly mentioned a resource, a security type, or if you have exposed a resource over a number of methods such as get, put, post, and delete, and all of that, which sometimes might not be necessary. So based on these analysis, this gives you a score. and it if it finds something that doesn't look right, it also gives you a suggestion of this definition doesn't look right, like you have missed to mention the security type in this particular resource, you have missed to mention the scope in this particular place, and thereby making sure that you have a very good definition for your API. So this is all about the design time. It's not a runtime security thing.
Okay, yeah, got it. So, because in API, whenever we say we normally calculates the runtime aspects thing. I mean, it's all about runtime governance. We are saying whenever we talk about APIs. So when we say design time, so we probably talk more into like I mean traditional SOA approach, wherein we expose services. Okay, yeah, I got this one. Yeah, so it's more of a design time. Okay, sure.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, sorry, I missed the first part of the presentation today, so you maybe discuss about it. But how about GRPC support? It will be released soon, or be part of the next one of the next release?
Yes, so actually we are working on supporting GRPC, but this is coming in for the micro gateway actually. So in our next release of the micro gateway, which is also version 3.1 and happening in the same time, like at the end of this month, we will be enabling support for GRPC proxy. So if you have a GRPC endpoint, you can expose that through the micro gateway with this release.
Okay. There is a reason why it will be supported by micro gateway and not the normal gateway. So what's the reason behind?
So it's there's no specific reason. It's basically we have to support it on both gateways eventually. So we have started off by supporting it in the micro gateway first, and eventually we will be adding it to the regular gateway as well.
Okay. And another question, so the same apply for HTTP2, right? It's supported only, this is already supported by micro gateway.
Yes, HTTP2 is already supported in the micro gateway.
But not for the normal one. There's no
Yes,
plan.
not for the regular gateway. So the reason why we chose the micro gateway for these protocols is primarily because these protocols are much more popular in the microservices space than in the regular space. So it's highly likely that people would be using a micro gateway for these types of microservices instead of the regular gateway.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Laszlo is here. I just missed pretty much everything, but I see that it's recorded. Where is going to be available recording session?
Yeah, we will put the recording up on Slack.
Awesome.
Laszlo.
Great. Thank you, Nuwan.
Okay, guys, I think that brings us to the end of the first ever API Manager community call. I'm pretty excited about this, and it was a pretty good session to have. And so moving on, like I mentioned in the beginning, we hope to do this every 2 weeks, and we hope to get all of your suggestions and questions through our various channels. And we also have a Google form that is again shared on our Slack channel, where you can add suggestions for the next call. So if you want to discuss on a particular topic, please do put it in this form, and please stay tuned on our Slack channel. And we hope to have another conversation, a pretty rich conversation back in 2 weeks. So thanks a lot, guys, for making it and for making the time. We'll share the recording on our Slack channel, and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye.